So I think we should just start with going through the steps of the creation as we have it in that graphic that we put together. The purpose of the beginning should be, I think, to show that there is a Purusha in other branches. If we understand the Purusha correctly, which has generally not been done very well in comparative mythology, or has not been done at all almost in comparative mythology. If we actually understand what the Purusha is, then we actually can identify it in a specific way in the other branches. And that's what I kind of want to get across, because due to the fact that the Purusha is so vague and kind of confusing of a topic, it has allowed comparative mythologists, us included in the past, probably, all of us, just to kind of use it in a loose sense, applying it to like Ymir, that's the one that we've all done, I'm sure. And looking at Ymir and saying, well, he has some things that align with the Purusha, right? But not 100%, but it's good enough. It's things change over time, and comparisons aren't exact. So Ymir is like a good enough comparison to the Purusha. But the problem is there are a ton of things that actually do contradict between Ymir and the Vedic Purusha. And when you understand the Purusha more specifically, there is actually a more specific parallel for the Purusha in Norse myth, and then across the board especially in Celtic myth, it's pretty, it's very, very clear. And then in Greek myth, it's possibly there as well, I think. So the two main things are, there is a Purusha. It's not this thing that developed only in India that is lacking in other branches, and that also, that opens the door for vague comparisons. If you think, oh, it's just a thing that developed over here in India, and it kind of connects to Ymir, but they had a different development. But that's not what was happening. Once you understand the Purusha, you can see that this concept was there in the Proto-Indo-European religion. And sure, of course, there's some different ways it was represented and changes, of course, but it has a well-defined role, and it's not Ymir. And the final thing that I really want to get across is that the Purusha is a being or a form of fire. And this is something that is not commonly at the forefront of people's consciousness when they're thinking about the Purusha. But I think we need to put this in the forefront of people's consciousness, because the Purusha is a form of the primordial Agni, the fire of the cosmos that has congealed together into a man, which is what Purusha means. So the Purusha is identified with Agni. He is the totality figure, but he's also somehow made of fire and fiery airs. And so with that in mind, that there is a more specific comparison to be made to the Purusha in European branches, and then B, the Purusha is a form of fire, we can start to hone in on who the Purusha is in these other branches. So was there a specific thing you wanted to outline regarding the correct creation sequence there, Arno?
Well, so from what I've heard from people, outside of the whole mess that the Manus and Yemel story has caused in understanding what the creation myth is, because every time I've heard people talk about it, they're like, this reflects like the cosmology and, what is important, like the whole basis of creation. And it gives it's ultimately just theological misinformation. And I've also heard from people that there are many different creation stories that are all simultaneously true, but like being different from one another throughout the
Yeah,
Vedas, even, which is not the case. Like, yeah, there are many different creation stories, but they can all fit into a continuity. They're all different steps in this same process.
right.
Um, and it begins, like, if you look at the Nasadiya Sukta, there's nothing Manas and Yama going on there. It all begins with tapas, um, and non being and being, rather than, you know, it's strange. Like, we can talk about the Manas and Yama stuff another time,
Yeah,
but sort of just focusing on how everything kind of begins with tapas, which is heat that churns from inert nothingness, and then from that sort of leads into everything that happens. You know, you have the Purusha, and then the whole Prajapati cosmic egg, and then yeah, essentially just that it all begins with us, and
yeah, yeah.
sort of doing away with, if anybody is sort of coming to this from a Manas and Yemo, pretend like you know nothing so that you don't get confused.
Yeah, definitely. We will touch on, we will go into Manos and Yemo in a different video in depth, but yeah, we should put that out there at the start here. This is completely different than the Mano and Yemis reconstruction, because the Mano and Yemis reconstruction is completely erroneous, and so you're not gonna, you're not gonna fit the Mano and Yemis into this creation myth, and this is the actual creation myth. And anyways, that should be clear that this is in contradiction to the Mano and Yemis reconstruction. Um, but yeah, and so the basic few steps, and we'll just have the graphic showing in the video of this chart. But you have basically, you have the Brahman, of course, which is unmanifest, and then there is kind of tapas and vital airs happening. Tapas being the churning, the fervor. It's sometimes translated as heat or fervor, and it's like when somebody's meditating and they're generating an internal heat through their austerities and their ascetic practice or whatever. It's kind of the image you want to have is like the Brahman kind of, well, the essence of the Brahman somehow is this fervent heat that's connected to what you generate when you meditate. So it's almost like the Brahman is meditating is an image you could have, although that's just a symbolic image, of course. So in the very beginning is a chaotic state somehow, involving this heat of tapas and also these chaotic airs that are like the breath of Brahman almost. You could picture, I think. So it's generating heat and breath. I say he, but the Brahman is an abstraction. But what you have is a state of chaotic, hot airs that are in the Brahmanas. They're described as the vital airs, and they congeal together into 7 Purushas, which Purusha just means man, and so they congeal together into 7 beings, and these beings then say, in order to generate, they want to generate, to create, and in order to do that, they have to congeal again into one totality Purusha, who is the Purusha. Um, these are beings composed of fiery, vital airs. So once they congeal into the Purusha is a form of fire and air, and in his actions, he is Prajapati. He's the higher form of Prajapati, who is the totality God. And what he does is, well, he is sacrificed in the Purusha sacrifice, but he is the totality. So it is kind of these vital airs, and these vital airs are deities in an unmanifest form, right? So they're called the perfected deities, the perfected gods, and they combine into this totality, and then in some sense it's a little bit unclear. So who is doing the sacrificing is some of these deities who are the vital heirs, right, or are connected to them somehow. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, so the vital heirs, obviously being identified with airs and wind, they're associated with Vayu, but the Shatapatha Brahmana specifically identifies them as Agni and kindling the other vital heirs with the power of, sorry, Indra, not Agni,
Yes.
um,
Oh yeah, Indra. Yeah.
and using the power of Indra to do that. And firstly, I thought it was interesting that it gives etymology in the Shatapatha Brahmana. Yeah, um, and the etymology it gives for Indra is this word ind, indh, and the etymology of that word actually has to do with the the Aeth and Elveth and ether
Mm,
being
mm,
like that,
okay. Mm,
the fiery burnt air, um, but also that power of Indra, which would obviously be thunder, lightning, is present in the Norse with Rasvelgar and Vidopnir, which is the rooster that sits atop of Rasvelgar, who's the origin of all wind. And
right.
well, we can get into that when we get into the Nori version, but essentially just highlighting Indra and the power of Indra in
Right. Right.
relation to the
Right.
vital layers of Purusha.
Yeah, Indra is like one of the only one. Indra is identified as one of the vital heirs, I believe, right? So Indra is among the vital heirs, and he's one of the only ones that's really named in these passages of the Shatapatha Brahmana, at least. So he's very important among the vital heirs, and he is the one who kindles them together into the flame that congeals into the Purushas and into the Purusha, right? So Indra is the kindling force because it's like lightning kindling things together into a blaze that becomes the Purusha, who is the sacrifice. So it's like kindling a sacrifice. Um, when the Purusha comes together, he is identified with the sacrificial fire itself and the man in the sacrifice, basically at the same time. So he is a kindled sacrificial fire who is sacrificing himself, basically. Uh,
Yeah,
but he's been
another
kindled by Indra among, yeah, as you were
yeah.
saying.
So
Indra is very important.
I don't recall exactly if he is one of them or if they collectively are Indra, but when they kindle the other vital airs, they are collectively doing it by the power of Indra. But
Yeah,
another thing with Indra and the other thunder gods is how often they are used to portray ego or individuality in myths, especially like chaos conf myths or initiatory mystic myths. Um, and the vital airs are disembodied and come into they sort of like manifest as Purusha, which is that sort of like singularity,
mm,
all that um, a lot of mystery religions talk about returning to, because we're sort of on the other side of that also in ego and individuality, in where many of the myths that detail how to achieve apotheosis, you have the thunder god Hercules in Greece, and there's even certain myths of Thor that reflect it, um, sort of going along that same line of in that state of individuality and ego, trying to achieve that apotheosis or oneness with
right,
the
right. Yeah, Indra is in this position where he is causing the individuation or the centering into an individual. The Purusha is like the ultimate self, the ultimate individual of the whole cosmos, and Indra is causing the congealing into that individual by kindling this fire together, or these airs. Um, right. So he is the he is identified with the sacrificer. He kind of creates the sacrifice in this way, and his um, in other places he's kind of identified with the sacrificer, the one who performs the sacrifice itself. And then I should mention that it seems to me, at least, based on some, some putting things together, that Vishnu is that when the Purusha finally emerges as the sacrifice, that Vishnu is kind of there's also this step between Indra and the final Purusha, which is Vishnu, and he is the god of the blossoming light. I guess Collin used a phrase something about the light and heat, because he's the god of Tejas and the and light as well, sort of spiritual light, and he is also the god of the sacred space of the sacrifice. So he kind of forms the basis of the sacrifice by being by himself, perhaps being born out of. There is this image of the Purusha finally emerging from some kind of womb or waters or earth or something as his congealed as a individual as the sacrifice, and Vishnu's associated with this very first moment of emergence of the Purusha. So he's kind of that sacred space that has been cleared and formed, and the heat and light that is filling that sacred space. And he kind of is the Purusha, or becomes the basis of the Purusha. So the tricky part is that the Purusha is identified with the totality, and repeatedly multiple different gods are overlaid onto the Purusha and identified with the Purusha as sort of a prism of totality. And so all the important gods get identified with the Purusha in some sense. But Vishnu is this step of the foundation of the Purusha. I think this is connected to Narayana being the god in the waters with the lotus leaf is sort of the what the Purusha sacrifice is resting upon, and this sort of womb that the Purusha is sort of born out of, and that's all associated with Vishnu. And then Vishnu, in his myth, he gets beheaded in the same way Cuchulainn does, and that is the moment he is identified fully with the sacrifice that is the Purusha. And somehow that overlays onto the Purusha, or is that step between Indra and the Purusha proper. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you have the power of Indra kindling them together, and then when those 7 Purushas are compressed into the one, you have Vishnu, who sort of like lays out the sacred space like he does in other myths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this also may help explain like the rise of Vishnu's importance
100%.
in modern Hinduism. Like obviously if he's the step that comes just before the Purusha, I mean obviously that would be a very important step in the whole metaphysics of Hinduism, and so obviously that would explain partly his eventual identification with the Purusha, or even something beyond and above the Purusha.
Exactly, that's exactly right, and thanks for pointing that out, because this is where in the Shatapatha Brahmana, Purusha gets called Narayana Purusha. Okay, so Narayana is the name associated with Vishnu in this connection, Vishnu Purusha, and the one who is in the waters, emerging out of the waters, with the lotus leaf and becoming identified with the Purusha. So there's definitely this connection there to why Vishnu became, he's like the foundation of the Purusha, basically, if what I'm saying is correct. And so that's why, you could see how that would be taken as he's the ultimate god from one perspective, at least. But then you have to also take into account, the Purusha itself is identified as Agni, and then, what is Agni? And so there are these multiple forces coming together, and there could be different arguments for this point in the generation of the Purusha is, the most important thing. Or you could say, Vishnu has come after Indra in this sequence, and Indra has come after is only one of the vital airs, and the airs are vayu. And so there are these competing perspectives you could analyze, I think. So what happens is the Purusha then gets sacrificed, and this sacrifice actually regenerates him. It kills him or whatever, or symbolically kills him, but he's the totality. So it actually burns away his impurities, his exhaustions, his whatever there may be. It's described in different ways, and it also makes the vital sap, which is soma, become concentrated and able to be retrieved by the priest or the quester, or however it may be, the initiate. But in the creation sequence, the Purusha itself, who is Prajapati in his actions, he generates earth and sky, which are the material shell of the cosmos he wants to create. He wants to generate, a manifest cosmos, because he's a totality figure of sort of disembodied a little bit, as fiery air, and so he forms the waters of the cosmos, it seems, at this step, and then he forms the material shell, which is the cosmic egg, and is earth and sky, or sometimes it's just described as earth material, and then he causes himself to be born from out of that cosmic egg as Prajapati, or Brahma, who is his own manifest form within the cosmos. Are there any points that I'm leaving out in that as I go through?
Not necessarily. Well, perhaps tapas being involved in virtually every step. It doesn't seem to be the creation of the waters, because it says he creates the waters via vach, or speech.
Mm.
But everything else, it says that he toils and practices austerity, which is an English translation for tapas, which it's often translated as austerity, but it means warmth and heat. And yeah, so when you have, it'll come back to it when we talk about the Welsh Purusha, I suppose, with the whole him being cooked, or the cosmic egg being incubated within it. With this warmth leads to, it seems to be the some kind of, I don't know if phenomenon is quite the correct word. It seems to be required for anything to sort of like progress or manifest forward, if you kind of get my meaning. It's sort of difficult to use words to describe these kinds of things in some steps.
Yeah,
That's true. Yeah.
It's like the unraveling of reality, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think it's interesting that Vach is mentioned, the goddess of voice. I was thinking of Canens, the daughter of Janus, who is the Roman god. Canens is the Roman goddess associated with singing, and especially a singing that can actually control nature. And I don't know, her being the daughter of Janus may be relevant, but we'll maybe have the opportunity to analyze how precisely that is eventually.
Definitely in that underlying stratum of that's kind of the very first chaotic underpinnings of everything. You have voice as well as the breath. You have Vach,
when I see that Prajapati
and tapas
co-creates with Vach, as is described sometimes, to me that's no difference than when you have other accounts from other cultures where God, or whatever name they use, speaks things into existence. That's essentially the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, that would be all connected, I think.
But yeah, so we have the steps from Brahman, the inert, everything, and sort of tapas, or heat, churning in the vital airs, kindling other vital airs into the Purushas, compressing them into the one Purusha who creates the universe, the cosmos as we know it, to manifest within as Prajapati. Those are all the steps, essentially. and
Yeah.
then we can sort of start going into the different branches. Because I
Do
had
you want
developed this.
to? Oh, sorry. Do you want to read the passage that sort of is it the sixth kanda of the? Do you want to read that passage where it talks about vital airs from the Shatapatha Brahmana, or
A
do you think
lot
we
of them
should
do, but I
just?
think so. Are you talking about the one that basically recounts creation but includes them?
Yeah, the
I
one that
think that's
talks
the
about the
sixth.
Purushas. Yeah.
Yeah, so verily in the beginning there was here the non existent, which right away I want to say, like, this is recounting creation. A lot of people rightfully think, and it's not wrong to say, that the Nasadiya Sukta is also creation myth, but I wonder if this takes place before because
Yeah,
it
me
talks
too.
about
I wonder if it
events
takes
that
place
happen
before.
before, because the Nasadiya Sukta seems to pick up when Prajapati is emerging as the, I mean, he's called that one, Tadakam.
Hmm.
But it picks up where he's emerging from the waters that the Purusha Prajapati creates via Vach.
So
And
it either happens before this either happens before, or the Nasadi Sukta could just be compressing so much into so few words that it's just jumping really fast
yeah, that
um,
could be. So
through the sequence.
what
So
we have in this, it's beginning in the non-existent, and then Nasadiya Sukta specifically, like the first line is neither non-existent nor existent. Um,
mhm.
but yeah, I would say, verily in the beginning there was here the non existent. As to this they say, what was that non existent? The rishis, assuredly. It is they that were the non existent. As so to this they say, who were the rishis doubtless were the vital heirs, inasmuch as before the existence of the universe, they, desiring it, wore themselves out, which he describes in commentary as the meaning of rishi, with toil and austerity, therefore they are called the rishis. The same vital air in the midst doubtless is Indra. He by his power kindled those other vital airs from the midst, inasmuch as he kindled, he is the kindler indeed, him they call Indra mystically, and also that mystically is translated as esoterically. But that essentially is describing, or it's explaining why he's called Indra, that it means to kindle, and it relates to that same root of ether and even Delvithe. Um, yeah, him they call Indra mystically, for the gods love the mystic. They, the vital airs being kindled, created 7 separate persons or Purushas. They said, surely, being thus, we shall not be able to generate. Let us make these 7 persons one person. They made those 7 persons one person, or the Purusha. They compressed 2 of them into what is above the navel, or the shoulders, 2 of them into what is below the navel, or the thighs. One person was one wing or side, one person was the other wing, and one person was the base, the feet, or sometimes the tail. Because when the actual sacrifice that the Shatapatha Brahmana is describing, the bricks they lay it in the shape of a bird instead of an actual human being. And what excellence, what life sap there was in those 7 persons that they concentrated above that became his head. And because in it they concentrated the excellence, therefore it is called the head, or Shiras. It was thereto that the breaths resorted, therefore it is also it is the head. And because the breath did so resort thereto, therefore also the breaths, vital airs on their organs, are elements of excellence, or Shri. And because they resorted to the whole system, therefore this is called the body, or Sharira. That same person became Prajapati, Lord of Generation, and that person which became Prajapati is this very Agni, fire altar, who is now to be built. He verily is composed of 7 persons, for this person Agni is composed of 7 persons. To wit, the body or trunk of 4, and the wings and tail of 3, for that body of that first person was composed of 4, and the wings and tail of 3, inasmuch as he makes the body larger by one person, by that force of the body raises the wings and tail. And as to the fire which deposited on the built altar, whatever excellence, whatever life sap there was in those 7 persons, that they now concentrated above, that is his or Prajapati's head. On that same head all the gods are dependent, for it is there that offering is made to all the gods. Therefore also it is the head. Now this person Prajapati desired, may I be more than one, may I be reproduced. He toiled and practiced austerity, or tapas. Being worn out with toil and austerity, he created first of all the Brahman, the triple science. It became to him a foundation. Hence they say the Brahman, Veda, is the foundation of everything here. Wherefore, having studied the Veda, one rests on a foundation. For this, to wit, the Veda is his foundation. Resting on that foundation, he again practiced austerity, or tapas. He created the waters out of vach, speech that is, the world. For speech belonged to it that was created, or set free. It pervaded everything there, and because it pervaded whatsoever there was, therefore it was called water. And because it was covered, therefore it was also called water. And it's, in parentheses, has two different words for water that they use in relation to pervasion and being covered. He desired, may I be reproduced from these waters. He entered the waters with that triple science. Thence an egg arose. He touched it. Let it exist and multiply, so he said. From it the Brahman was first created, the triple science. Hence they say, the Brahman is the firstborn of this all. For even that person, the Brahman was created. For even before that person, the Brahman was created. Okay, there we go. That clears some questions that we had. It was created as his mouth, hence they say, of him who has studied the Veda, that he is like Agni, for it, the Brahman or Veda, is Agni's mouth. Now the embryo which was inside the egg was created as the foremost, inasmuch as it was created foremost of this all. Therefore it is called Agni. Yep.
Yeah. So we should probably, is there any other parts of that you want to mention? I think we should, that's like the main, those are the most important parts, I think, so far. But is there any more of that you want to read?
I mean, it's almost to the end of it. It just talks about him hatching from the egg, it being Prajapati, and creating the earth and the heavens.
Yeah. The only other thing that I have in my notes is in the next paragraph it says, in that which was the shell became the earth. So the Purusha, in his actions, is Prajapati, the higher form of Prajapati. He forms this egg in the waters that he's created, and then from this egg is born, in this it says the Brahman is born out of it. So this is like the manifestation of the Brahman out of the egg, which is himself. And that's clearer in my previous video that I just recently made. I go through all of that and how the being that's born out of the egg is the remanifestation of Purusha Prajapati as Brahma, or the manifest Brahman Purusha, if that makes sense. So it's really just a continuation of himself. He's created an egg so that he can be born within the material shell that he's created, the material world.
I think it would be worth mentioning, just in case whoever is listening hasn't watched the 2-hour-long Deduce video.
Exactly.
That this egg is the primordial sky father and earth mother together as one, which together as one is Emir. And then describing the shell as the earth also explains why when it's split, when it's separated, heaven and earth from each other, different cultures have described the sky being born from the earth, or the earth being born from the sky, because in the Greek you have Ornos being son of Gaia, or
exactly.
You have
well, in Hesiod at least, like you also have the variant versions in which they're brother and sister, so everything is always like under a veil of symbolism. Of course.
So you can see how those can be harmonized. How can they be brother and sister, or mother and son? It's because it's describing the fact that they were a unity of earth and sky as the shell, and when the shell breaks apart, it's like they're giving birth to each other, but they're also kind of like siblings. So it's this esoteric concept of the material shell is sky and earth. That's a pretty straightforward concept. And when they're split apart, one can be the sky can be the sun of the earth in that sense, especially since the whole egg is like a material substance. So I think that could be part of it too, because it's like, why is Gaia placed before Uranus is an interesting question, but it's the egg is a hard shell, which then breaks apart into sky and earth. And yeah, so the other thing I want to do is I have some excerpts that I want to add to the picture of the Purusha. So the big things that I want to point to are, of course, that the Purusha is repeatedly identified as Agni, as the fire and the fire altar itself. And then he's also called the Ender, and he's identified as death itself. So these are things that might be surprising to people who don't know much about the Purusha and are trying to understand this comparison that we're going to be making. For example, Ymir in the Norse version is the sky and earth as a unity. That is, as I've described, the material shell. Like he's like basically the Norse version of this this eggshell that the higher Purusha has created, and then Buri is the manifest Brahma. So Ymir is created in the Prose Edda. It says he's created by the breath of heat, caused by that which sent the heat. So there is heat and a breath of heat that melts the rime and the poison flow, called Aether, right?
So Aether is what the
Like
Elivogar
Aether is
melts
like
into. So the
That's what it
Elivogar
melts
are the
into.
frozen rivers in
Oh, yeah.
Niflheim.
Oh, yeah.
I actually developed
Yeah.
some thoughts on Muspelheim and Niflheim that I'll get into after you're done talking.
Yeah. So basically, there is some sort of disembodied breath of heat that's being sent by a power of heat out of Muspelheim. This is specifically said to be the cause of the melting that forms Ymir in the Prose Edda, in Snorri's version. And so, if you align these properly, you have a breath of fiery, or a heat breath coming out of Muspelheim, that is the land of the primordial fires, which melts these ice flows and forms Ymir, who is the shell, the material shell. And as we're going to describe a little more, this points to either Muspelheim as a whole being, the land of the Norse Purusha, or identified with the Norse Purusha, or the obvious question from that is there a being, is there a cosmic being who is like the congealed fires of Muspelheim formed together into one being? And the obvious answer is yes, there is. And that is Surtr, who is he is an apocalyptic sort of figure who brings destruction in the end, and he's terrifying, and he's a being of fire who lives in the pre-cosmic world of fire. But he's sort of the embodied representation of the fires of Muspelheim. So he would be a possible parallel of the Purusha as a being of fire. And I want to read some further passages on the Purusha to help that comparison start to make sense, because some people will say, Surtr is represented as a destroyer and as only evil or something like that. But if he's this cosmic fire in the beginning, he is the source of both all life coming from the fire. In Indo-European cosmology, fire it's the essence of life, and he is the embodiment of the pre-cosmic fire. But it's also death. It's also destruction at the same time. And that's made repeatedly clear in describing the Purusha. He is both life itself, the source of life, the totality, but being the totality, he is also explicitly said to be death. So he's both life and death in one. And that's actually part of the mystical understanding that the Purusha sacrifice is trying to embody and drive home, that once the sacrificer understands that the Purusha is both life and death, and that in your your higher self is identified with the Purusha, that you are then identifying yourself with death. And in that way, the sacrificer was supposed to be able to transcend this duality of life and death. So I'll just read these passages, and hopefully they will paint the picture. The gods heated him in the fire, and when the fire rose over him, thus heated, that same vital air which had gone out from him came back to him, and they put it into him. And the vigor which had gone out of him, they put into him. And the food which had flowed from him, they put into him. Having made him up entire and complete, they raised him, so as to stand upright. And inasmuch as they thus raised him upright, he is these worlds. So this is reiterating that this is a regenerative sacrifice, actually, that the vital airs and the food, they go out of him over time, in some sense, and have to be cyclically placed back into him. And that's part of the sacrifice. And this is a detail that will become very explicit in the Welsh version. This exact scene is described, so keep that in mind. And the Prajapati, who became relaxed, that is, once the Purusha or Prajapati performs acts of creation and a cyclical action occurs, he becomes exhausted or relaxed. So it says, and this Prajapati who became relaxed is this same Agni who is now being built up. And when that fire pan lies there empty before being heated, it is just like Prajapati, as he lay there with the vital air and the vigor gone out of him, and the food having flowed out. He heats it on the fire, even as the gods then heated him. And when the fire rises over it thus heated, then that same vital air, which went out from within him, comes back to him, and he puts it into him. And when putting on the gold plate, he wears it. He puts into him that very vigor which had gone out of him. And when he puts on kindling sticks, he puts into him that very food which had flowed from him. So each of these parts of the sacrifice that the sacrificer is doing are symbolic of putting this food and the fire and the vigor back into the Purusha. These same ceremonies should be performed during a whole year, for that Prajapati, whence those substances went out, is the year. Into that whole Prajapati, he thus puts all that which belongs to him. So he's putting the things that belong to Prajapati, the totality, back into the Prajapati, Purusha. And as I said before, Prajapati/Purusha is repeatedly called the year, so much that the year can be just a name that means Purusha or Prajapati. So he's completely identified with the year, because the year is the unit of totality within time, and so he is the totality, and thus he is the year. And then the year is also identified with death, and so there's this continuity between these identifications. When the gods,
this is also very relevant to Janus in Rome. Like, he's the god of the beginning of the new year and of the end of the previous year, so it kind of checks out with Prajapati and the year association.
Yeah, definitely. And this is an important thing to also remember in some of the other comparisons, because again, in the Welsh version, the Welsh Purusha, it's said that he comes and stays with the king, who is Father Sky, for a year. So that anytime in other branches that this god is mentioned, often they are connected with the year again. They're doing something for the length of a year, and that's an esoteric sign that this is talking about the Purusha. When the gods restored the relaxed Prajapati, they cast him as seed into the fire pan, the womb, the fire pan being indeed a womb. In the course of a year, they prepared for him this foundation, even this terrestrial world, the Garhapatya hearth being this world. Therein they generated him, and whatever evil there was in him, whatever mucus, whatever inner and outer membrane, that they removed from him by means of these bricks. So again, this is a purifying. These excerpts kind of explain and help us understand the ideology behind this sacrifice, which is, again, this is a core sacrifice of all Vedic sacrifice, and it is sort of the sacrifice that's happening in any sacrifice in some sense, or this same ideology at least is at work. So they're purifying and reinvigorating this Purusha, who symbolizes the totality. In like manner, the sacrificer now casts his own self. So then the sacrificer identifies himself with the Purusha, and thus he is also regenerated. Casts his own self as seed into the fire pan, the womb, the fire pan being indeed a womb. And whatever evil there is of it, whatever mucus, whatever inner and outer membrane, that he removes therefrom by these bricks. Okay, so then when the gods restored the relaxed Prajapati, they poured him as seed into the fire pan. In the course of a year, they prepared for him this food, to wit, the fire altar, built here, and enclosed it in a body. And being enclosed in a body, it became the body itself. Whence food enclosed in a body becomes the body itself. In like manner does the sacrificer now pour his own self. The year, doubtless, is the same as death. So that is explicitly referring to the Purusha as the year. It's saying the Purusha is the year, and then the year, who is Purusha, doubtless is the same as death. For he it is who, by means of day and night, destroys the life of mortal beings, and then they die. Therefore the year is the same as death. And whosoever knows this year to be death, his life, that year, does not destroy by day and night, before old age, and he attains his full extent of life. And he indeed is the ender, for it is he who by day and night reaches the end of the life of mortals, and then they die. Therefore he is the ender, and whosoever knows this year, death, the ender, the end of his life, that year, does not reach by day and night, before old age, and he attains his full extent of life. The gods were afraid of this Prajapati, the year, death, the ender, lest he by day and night should reach the end of their life. They who do not know this, or who do not do this holy work of the sacrifice, come to life again when they die, that is reincarnation. So you can see in this version, at least, the Shatapatha Brahmana, it has an ideology of reincarnation as part of it, and trying to transcend reincarnation. In the Shatapatha Brahmana, reincarnation is identified with being the food of death, of this, you become the food of death over and over again. But if you identify yourself with death, with Purusha, you don't come to life again. You transcend that as, so there's a form of immortality that's implying. And, this is arguable whether this ideology of reincarnation was always in this part of the sacrifice, because the Shatapatha Brahmana, it's not from the early Vedic period. So anyways, that's a debatable issue, but you have to admit that the core of this sacrificial ideology had to be there from the beginning, because it informs the entire structure of this mythos that is across all the European branches that we're going to look at. So there's some core of this sacrifice being, its purpose being to somehow transcend death by identifying with it. They who do not know this, or do not do this holy work, come to life again when they die, and they become the food of him, death, time after time. But when he builds the fire altar, he thereby gains Agni, Prajapati, the year, death, the ender, whom the gods gained. It is him he lays down, even as the gods thus laid him down. So it is this Purusha that he sacrificed, even as the gods did in the archetypal moment.
By the
Now
way, this reference to the food of death, or food being death in some way, reminds me actually of the food of Hades. We all know, obviously, the myth in which Persephone, by eating the food, is eternally linked to the underworld. An interesting thing, however, is that this actually had a reflection in ritual practice. So offerings given to the gods of the sky, or the atmosphere, or the sea, were usually eaten after the sacrifice, right, by humans, officiants, and also people who just came in to participate in the eating after the sacrifice. But offerings given to the deities of death, and namely Hades and Persephone, were not eaten. They were obviously kind of in some way symbolic of death. So this is one of the many points where myth and ritual are closely linked to each other, and where we do have this echo of the food of death in both Greece and India. So it's possibly something to keep in mind, although obviously Hades is not a Purusha himself, or a Prajapati, or anything like that.
I don't know. It could be.
Well,
I'm just
obviously
kidding.
he's one of the many deities who could relate to him in one way or another,
Well,
which doesn't narrow it down really.
I'm
So,
still exploring the Crom Dubh possible parallel with Hades, and Crom Dubh being form of the Celtic Progepti. But yeah, uh, anyways, tangent. Now this speech is yonder sun, and this Agni, the fire altar, is death. Hence, whatsoever is on this side of the sun, all that is held by death. And he who builds it, the fire altar, on this side thereof, builds it as one held by death. And he surrenders his own self unto death. But he who builds it there above conquers recurring death. For by his knowledge, that altar of his is built there above. And that man in yonder sun's orb is no other than death. And that glowing light is that immortal element. Therefore death does not die, for he is within the immortal. And therefore he is not seen, for he is within the immortal. There is this verse, within death is immortality, for below death is immortality. Founded on death is immortality, for established on that man in the sun, the immortal shines. Death putteth on the radiant one, vivas vant, doubtless is yonder sun, for he irradiates vivas day and night, and it is him that death puts on. For on every side he is surrounded by him. Death's self is in the radiant, for the self body of that man indeed is in that orb. Such then is that verse. Now that man in yonder sun and this man in the right eye are no other than death. And he becomes the body self of him who knows this. Whenever he who knows departs this world, he passes into that body and becomes immortal, for death is his own self. Now as to the sacrifice, whatever food is placed on the fire, that is its food, and whatever water, that is its water. So anyways, this just reiterates what I've been saying, that Purusha is repeatedly identified as death, and the ideology of the sacrifice is to somehow identify the sacrificer with death, who is then understand in sort of a non-dual way as, the totality is death, who is also the radiant and the source of all life. And once you're able to identify yourself with this two-sided totality, that fully understand this, how the Purusha can also be death, then there is a path to transcending death, and by identifying oneself with the totality. And so this lays the foundation for how we can understand Surtr as, he is the embodied, congealed fires of Muspelheim. He is at least the only representative of the land of pre-cosmic fire, which is Muspelheim. And he is the name the Ender is applied to the Purusha, and the whole role of Surtr in the main part of the Norse mythology is that he is the ender of, he brings the fires that end the cycle of the cosmos. But again, that shouldn't be taken as him being like an evil demon who wants to destroy the world, because the Indo-Europeans had an understanding of the cycles of time, the cycles of the cosmos, as a necessary thing. So if the world is born out of cosmic fire, which is a sort of a widely understood concept, I think, and it's appearing here in the Vedic material especially, then also those cosmic fires that create the world also are going to end them in the end. And in other later versions of the Hindu and the post-Vedic apocalypse mythology, it is always Agni himself who is the fire that destroys the world, and usually in the form of a horse's head or a mare of some kind that lives underneath the waters and then emerges from the waters to burn down the world. So that which burns down the world at the end of the cycle isn't evil in itself, is what I'm trying to say. And fire is, the higher form of fire is the Purusha, and the Purusha is also the Ender, and the Purusha is death. So Therefore, there shouldn't be a problem with understanding Surt, who is the ender of the cosmos, as actually this pre-cosmic being who is also the source of creation, as we see. So in these sort of vague sentences from Snorri, where it says Ymir is formed by the breath of heat and the power that sent the heat, these have to be coming out of Muspelheim. The sort of representative figure of Muspelheim is this Surt, who then would be the higher form of the Norse Prajapati, who is the Purusha. And he would be sending up his breath of heat to melt the ice, which then forms into Ymir, who is, again, the cosmic egg. He is the earth and sky in a unity, as when he's divided, he becomes earth and sky. And so once you understand those pieces, everything aligns a little bit too perfectly to ignore. So again, you first have to understand that Ymir actually is the cosmic egg. You then have to know the mythology of the Purusha is the one who forms the cosmic egg, and he is a being of fire. And then you perfectly have Surt sending the breath of heat from the land of Muspelheim to form Ymir, who is the cosmic egg. And then, as I've explained, Buri, who is born up out of the ice, he is the remanifest form of this Prajapati. Within, he comes post Ymir, he comes right after Ymir. And the reason is because the material shell of the cosmos, Ymir, has to be formed first by the cosmic fire, who is Purusha. And then after that material shell, Ymir, is formed, Buri is able to emerge as the completed manifestation of Surt. So that means that Buri is the remanifestation of Surt within the material cosmos. Did you guys have anything to add on that?
Well, I think
I'm just sort of
jumping off of Surtr would be a great transition to the Irish version with Delvaith Lugad and Yogan.
Yeah, me too. I don't want to dwell too long on these because we can kind of just outline them pretty quickly. But again, the main identifications of Purusha are Agni, the year, death, and the ender. And people don't understand this about the Purusha. They think the Purusha can just be some giant who is like Ymir. He's just a material giant who turns into sky and earth. But sky and earth are only one part of the Purusha. There's like 16 different parts listed in the Purusha hymn, and sky and earth are just one of those. And so that's why Ymir is created by the breath of heat. And so it is sort of it is below, in some sense, it is subordinate to the one who creates it, and it's only one of his emanations. And you'll also see even in the Irish version, the Irish Purusha is the father of the sky and earth deities. So it's the same genealogy is preserved across the board in different branches. So Surt is the most likely Norse Purusha. He is the being of fire who is the ender. He creates the material shell, and then Buri is able to emerge. And so, yeah, this takes us to the Welsh version, and this, we're able to understand the probable Welsh Purusha because we now know that the Purusha, like Surt, is the moment of creation that happens right before the dividing of earth and sky. Like Ymir is the Ymir being cut in half is the dividing of earth and sky. Odin and his brothers divide Ymir in two, and they create the sky from his head and the earth from his body parts. And so that happens after the moment involving Surt, who is the likely Norse Purusha. So if we go to the Welsh, we know already the Welsh myth of the dividing of earth and sky is the tale known as Branwen, daughter of Llŷr. And Branwen, daughter of Llŷr, tells the story of Efnisien, who is Odin, and his brothers fighting a war against Matholach and against Matholach, who is the abusive husband of Branwen. That is the marriage of earth and sky. So Matholach and Branwen married together as a unity. They are the equivalent of Ymir. And that is a difficult understanding for some people to get, but basically sometimes the unity of earth and sky is depicted as a marriage of the earth and sky god. And then it is divided in a war, as in the Greek version also. Or in the Norse version, it is depicted as one primordial giant who is a unity, and he gets divided. But the upshot of whatever version is that earth and sky are created as separate entities from this violent act of division, which is either a war or like Odin cutting Ymir in two. So if we look at the war of Efnisien against Matholach, that is the Welsh division of sky and earth. The Welsh Purusha then would have to have happened just before this, right? So there's one interesting thing in the story of Branwen, daughter of Llyr, and it is Bran telling Matholach the prologue of their story. So Bran actually discusses with Matholach the events that had led up to this war to divide earth and sky. And interestingly enough, this story is about a giant and his wife who, well, the giant has yellow hair and his name means something regarding blue enamel. And this will come back. This name will come back when we look at the Greek version, because blue enamel is symbolic of the ether, especially in Greek myth. And the ether is the Greek version of this pre-cosmic domain of the Purusha. So this giant and his wife are put into an iron house. And the iron house should already be a clear symbol of a sacrificial space. And then this iron house is heated up with a fire, and the giant and his wife are cooked inside this iron house. So it's a very strange scene, and you just have to, there's no way to look at this scene without thinking there is some underlying esoteric meaning to it. And I'll read the passage here. So Matholach is Father Sky, and he's talking to Bran. And Bran is like, he's like Mimir or Yama. He's just the king of, he's Efnisian's brother. This would be like if Mimir and Odin were brothers, and they were discussing with Ymir before fighting him. So, and they're talking about they're trying to make a peace agreement at this moment before the war. And the peace offering is this cauldron that has arrived to Bran from this other giant who ends up being the Purusha. So there's this passing of the sacred liquid from the Welsh Purusha to Bran in the form of a cauldron. My lord, said Matholach, that's Father Sky, whence hadst thou the cauldron which thou hast given me? I had it of a man who had been in thy land, said he, and I would not give it except to one from there. Who was it? Asked he. Flasar Flasgavnid, and that means something like blue enamel, something about blue enamel, and apologies for my pronunciation. He came here from Ireland with his wife, Cumadu Cuminval, his wife who escaped from the iron house in Ireland when it was made red hot around them, and fled hither. And it is a marvel to me that thou shouldst know nothing concerning the matter. Something I do know, said he, and as much as I know I will tell thee. One day I was hunting in Ireland, and I came to the mound at the head of the lake, which is called the Lake of the Cauldron, and I beheld a huge yellow-haired man coming from the lake with a cauldron upon his back. And he was a man of vast size and of horrid aspect, and a woman followed after him. So already here he has a horrid aspect. So this again ties back to how the gods, it's said in the Shatapatha Brahma, the gods are afraid of the Purusha because he is death. And here in the Welsh version, still, he has a horrid aspect. And as you'll see, the people of the land turn against him because they're kind of, he's causing problems for them, as fire or death might do. And if the man was tall, twice as large as he was the woman, and they came towards me and greeted me. Verily, asked I, wherefore are you journeying? Behold, this, said he to me, is the cause that we journey. At the end of a month and a fortnight, this woman will have a son, and the child that will be born at the end of the month and the fortnight will be a warrior fully armed. So I took them with me and maintained them, and they were with me for a year. So again, the year is specifically tied to this figure. This giant stays with Matholwch, who is Father Sky, for a year exactly. And that year I had them with me not grudgingly, but thenceforth was their murmuring, because that they were with me. For from the beginning of the 4th month, they had begun to make themselves hated and to be disorderly in the land, committing outrages and molesting and harassing the nobles and ladies. And thenceforward my people rose up and besought me to part with them, and they bade me to choose between them and my dominions. So again, this is an esoteric depiction of the land of Father Sky. So it's this sort of pre-cosmic sky land, kind of like the ether, perhaps, as we'll see. And the inhabitants of that land, they're going to be something like the vital airs, whatever is sort of floating around in this pre-cosmic sky. And as in the Purusha myth, they become afraid of the Purusha, and they decide they want to put him in an iron house and burn him. They bade me to choose between them and my dominions. And I applied to the council of my country to know what should be done concerning them. For of their own free will they would not go, neither could they be compelled against their will through fighting. And the people of the country, being in this strait, they caused a chamber to be made all of iron. Now when the chamber was ready, there came there every smith that was in Ireland, and every one who owned tongs and hammer. And they caused coals to be piled up as high as the top of the chamber. And they had the man and the woman and the children served with plenty of meat and drink. So remember, as I said before, they repeatedly say in the Purusha sacrifice, we are putting food into the Purusha. We are putting food back into the fire and back into the Purusha to reinvigorate him with food. And in this myth, it says they put them in this iron house, and the man, the woman, and his children are served with plenty of meat and drink. So again, you have this details of the sacrificial ideology are preserved across branches, and that means that this ideology was a coherent whole that was the basis of this whole myth. But when it was known that they were drunk, they began to put fire to the coals about the chamber, and they blew it with bellows until the house was red hot all around them. Then was there a council held in the center of the floor of the chamber, and the man tarried until the plates of iron were all of a white heat. And then by reason of the great heat, the man dashed against the plates with his shoulder and struck them out, and his wife followed him. But except him and his wife, none escaped thence. Yep. And I suppose, Lord, said Matholwch unto Bendigeid Vran, that he came over unto me.
So when you were, when I heard you talk about the Welsh Purusha and his wife being fed very well, was that while they were in the iron house or not? But I know this the Purusha, but obviously like the being in the iron house and cooking, that was like the incubation of the cosmic egg esoterically. Would that be a good match for Ymir suckling Althumbla? I'm not saying obviously that Ymir is Purusha, but like they're in like the cosmic egg state at that point, and that's sort of like
that's interesting.
Feeding reality. I wondered if
that's a really good question to start with. So I wanted to touch on this food thing, and so originally I was thinking, the Purusha and the cosmic egg could sort of be overlaid as happening at the same time. But the more I think about it, it seems like the Purusha event, the Purusha sacrifice, is what happens right before he creates the cosmic egg, I think. So I believe this iron house, which is the Purusha sacrifice, is happening before he creates Sky Earth, the cosmic egg. So I think he, or time is very abstract in this space. So it could be happening. The Purusha sacrifice could be happening after he does creation or before, but I think it's happening cyclically. This Purusha sacrifice, it happens in cycles. But I believe what goes on with the Purusha is at a step above the cosmic egg itself. Actually, it happens before. So, but that is an interesting thought about Aldumbla, because Viraj is mentioned in the Purusha Sukta and connected with food and all that. So there's this continuity, and it seems like there's always an echo in each successive step of the creation, right, of things going on before. But I think the most direct parallel we can see in this Welsh version, where Llasar and his wife and his children, they're all put inside an iron house, and then very strangely they're given lots of food while they're being burned alive in this house. So obviously there's no way, I think it's completely impossible to look at this as a straightforward story about just an event about a giant or something. I think there's no way to read this other than it being a sacrifice that's happening. And it matches exactly with the way the Purusha is described as the sacrificer giving the food back to the Purusha as he's sacrificing the Purusha. He's replacing the food that had gone out of. So there's this image of the food. The Purusha is the totality. So he is filled with the food of the cosmos, and the food and the energy and things like that go out of him over time, throughout the cycle, and via the process of creation and his actions that exhaust him. The food goes out of him, and then the food has to be put back into him to reconstitute him as he's being sacrificed as part of this. So that's the sacrificial offerings, the food being put into the fire that is the Purusha. It's replacing, replenishing this cosmic fire that is this Purusha. So you see this idea preserved almost exactly in the Welsh version, which is just, I mean, I just can't get over these types of things. It's just amazing. Literally, this giant and his wife are being burned alive, cooked in this iron house, and they're being given food and drink at the same time. And interestingly, this burning alive doesn't kill this giant or his wife. And this connects to how the Purusha sacrifice, it is a sacrifice, but he's the cosmic fire, and he is life and death itself, and it doesn't really kill him. What it ultimately does is purifies and regenerates him. So that's what's happening in the myth of Llasar. He eventually bursts out of this iron house and brings with him a cauldron of sacred liquid. So this is exactly what happens in the Purusha myth as well. Is the Purusha is regenerated, he's refilled with food, and he's purified of impurities that have developed, and then also the vital sap rises up in him. So there's this description of the vital sap rising up so that the priest or the initiate can retrieve the vital sap, which is soma. It is soma. And this is where the soma mythos gets emanated or extended from this starting point, because the Purusha Prajapati is soma. Soma is an emanation of him, and this is where the primordial soma gets generated and then taken from there. And that's exactly what happens in the Welsh version. Is the upshot of this iron house myth with Llasar is that he escapes the iron house and brings with him a cauldron of sacred liquid. So that's what he makes off with from the iron house. Very, very strange until you understand that it's the Purusha sacrifice, and then every single detail makes sense. And he carries the cauldron of sacred liquid, which is a cauldron of regeneration as well. He carries it to from Ireland, quote unquote, to the island of Britain. He gives it to Bran there, and then it gets passed along back to Mythology from there, and then destroyed by Efnisien eventually. So the other interesting detail you could comment on there is that the children, this couple of giants, Hlasar and his wife, they're apparently having children at a very rapid rate. They're and this is connecting to the Prajapati mythos in general, because Prajapati is the generator. He generates offspring. That's part of what the word Prajapati even means. Is he is the source of generation and procreation specifically. So him and his wife are having lots of children. They have them in the iron house with them, and apparently the children don't survive this the sacrifice. It says only the giant and his wife survive being burned in this iron house. So that's interesting. It seems possible that could connect to like the purification. Somehow these children that he's generated have been purified. They're what get purified apparently in this version. So maybe his children are like they are. It's hard to exactly understand why the children are being the ones who are burned in the house apparently, but they are obviously symbolic of something connected.
Could that be the
emanations
vital airs
of this
being
fruit.
kindled into one?
Yes, they could be they could be things, parts of him that have kind of been separating off from him and they need to be congealed back together. Yeah, that would make sense to me as well. So sort of the cyclical mythos of Purusha Prajapati is that he kind of, things go out from him and then they are brought back into him. The energies in general, energies and life go out of him. So that's his children, I guess, and food, etc., go out from him. Then they have to be congealed back into him in the sacrifice, and the food being put back into him. So, and then he's purified. So obviously the children have taken that place in the mythos of the energies that go out of him, the things that are, in the end, he's made one again, is the upshot of the Welsh myth. Obviously, he's made one. And in the Purusha descriptions in the Shatapatha Brahmana and elsewhere, the Purusha is often paired, or is, generally paired with a female aspect. Sometimes it's like the stones of the altar are the feminine aspect, things like that. Certain parts of the altar or the words being spoken by the priest are, the vach aspect. So there is always this, with the Purusha, there is this feminine, deified force that is sort of his consort. So it makes sense, if the wife of Hlasar is there with him, that makes perfect sense with the Purusha sacrifice. And she could potentially be something like Vach, the goddess of speech, or something like that, because there's different ways that it's characterized.
This is an excellent transition to Surtr and Sinmara, and that passage in, I don't remember if I think it's Gylfaginning, I might be wrong, where it's Surtr and Sinmara are said to be grieved upon by Vidopnir, who's like perched atop the head of Hrasvelgr, who's the origin of all wind. And Vidopnir, he's like, I'd have to look up the exact wording, but it's kind of similar to Apam-Napat in the way that he's like clothed in lightning or something like that, which would connect to the power of Indra that's used to kindle the vital airs, which, and then obviously you have Surtr and Samara together being, grieved upon or kindled, just as Hlasar and his wife and Purusha and this feminine aspect he is associated with. If you have any more to say on that, I'm going to look it up real quick.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. The one thing, there's a big caveat with the Vithropnir, that this is from sort of an uncertain reading of manuscripts, this whole myth. So it's hard to know. It's different interpretations say that Surtr is mentioned in this passage, and other interpretations say Surtr isn't actually being mentioned in this passage. So I just wanted to put that caveat out there, but it's a fascinating possibility if this is discussing Surtr.
Yeah, I have seen that. And also, that one is a bit iffy. I know that after the call yesterday, I mentioned that there are other similarities in Norse mythology to the two groups of vital heirs, but I'm pretty sure we came to the conclusion that those were, which I was saying was Muspelheim and Niflheim, are probably, are not, because that would put Ymir in the place of Purusha. And then, oh yeah, I think one of the things you ended on in the last call was you didn't get to how the blue enamel meaning of Thasar's name related to Aether, and then we can talk about Bloin as well.
Okay, well, the only thing is that I don't have the citation right in front of me, but just in the Greek sources, the Aether is described as blue or connected to the color blue. So I'll have to look that up, but it is just it's just sort of a color association especially in the Greek tradition, that blue connects to ether. So that's something to keep in mind with the name of Thasar, because we're going to be looking at ether as the Greek version. Yeah.
Well, doesn't it also have something to do with the way the light of the sun illuminates the air?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That makes sense to me. I'm not sure about the origin of it.
Yeah, there's also the phenomenon in ancient European languages where the color blue would be used to describe things that are dark or black, oftentimes. So
yeah,
that could also be another name for Surtr, because ether, Surtr, and then obviously when you have Thasar and his wife being burned, I mean, ether and Surtr are names that kind of describe like something that is burnt, has been heated up or lit ablaze.
Yeah.
So that could be, though it would be strange if Bloin was another name for Surtr, that he has two names that basically reflect that. So perhaps it really does mean blue here and how the atmosphere is lit up.
Yeah, it could still just mean blue. I think the name in the Welsh version is pretty clearly just blue. So
ether. I was thinking, so Deduce is related to Akasha, which is ether, or the Purusha is ether.
Correct.
And I was wondering if that's like the reason why there's confusion between Ymir being Purusha or not. There are certain, like perhaps that has to do with.
Yeah. I was having that same thought. And I was also thinking about the, when you look at ether being connected to Zeus, as we'll see, Zeus is seen as an embodiment of the ether. It's possible that could also connect to the reason Zeus overlaps more with the sky, deduce, and sort of this another connection between Mitra type mythos and the deduce type mythos in that primordial ether there. So, but yeah, it could also connect to the Ymir, because Ymir is sky, and there's a direct connection. As you see in the Welsh version, Matholwch is Ymir because Matholwch is sky and Ymir's skull is sky. So the Purusha sacrifice in the Welsh version is happening in the domain, in the land of Matholwch, of sky. At least, so it's sort of like sky before sky has, within the manifest world. So that's sort of what ether is. Ether is sort of this like proto higher version of sky, and then it kind of, as it manifests into the sky of the world, it becomes quote unquote our world sky, right? There's one other thing I wanted to mention with Thasar, and it is the fact that in the next section of the Mabinogion, it's all about Manawyddan, and Manawyddan is Agni, the fire god of the world. Once the fire god splits off into just fire god Agni, he has his own separate mythos from the Purusha, but they're continuous. Purusha is the primordial Agni, and then Agni, splits off within the world. He's just his own individuated fire god. and this is Manawydan in the Welsh mythos. And what happens is Manawydan. So this is the only other time that Llasar is mentioned in the Mabinogion. He's mentioned as being burned in the Iron House, and then there's a callback to him in the myth of Manawydan, the fire god, when Manawydan and Lle go. They have to take on work as blacksmiths at one point, and it says that Manawydan emulates the work of Llasar. So it's like Manawydan has this direct line where he's continuing the blacksmith, quote unquote, the smithing work of Llasar. So it's this perfect line between the two manifestations of the fire god as smiths. And it's just this tiny reference that you would never understand what it's talking about, but it makes perfect sense when you realize that there are two forms of the fire god continuing this blacksmith, because, well, the Purusha Prajapati is also the cosmic smith, Vishvakarman. So here's the quote. It says, "And they betook themselves to making saddles, and Manawydan began to make housings, and he gilded and colored them with blue enamel, in the manner that he had seen it done by Llasar Llasgyfed. And he made the blue enamel as it was made by the other man, and therefore it is still called Calc Llasar, blue enamel, because Llasar Llasgyfed had wrought it." So anyways, I thought this was fascinating that the only other mention of Llasar is as sort of the model and the proto-Manawydan in the realm of smithing. So it's very neat, and it's just a very nice parallel. Yeah, so basically in the Welsh tradition, we have the dividing of earth and sky in the war against Matholwch and Branwen, and earth and sky is divided. And then we have the answer to the question, what is the prologue to this dividing of earth and sky in the Welsh tradition? And the prologue is that this giant, Llasar, is burnt in an iron house, and he escapes with a sacred liquid. So it's this, once you understand this, it's almost, it's almost simple to see how perfectly things line up, I think. And you have a very clear sequence of events that are not accidental, and they have this coherent mythos that even the sequence of events has stayed the same. The Purusha is generated, and then it's sacrificed, and then after that, what happens is the Purusha creates or generates earth and sky, and then earth and sky are divided, and you have that sequence of events right there in the Welsh mythology.
All right, yeah, and then the food, obviously, that they're fed, that's like the, like us becoming the food of death if we don't, like the excerpt that you were reading yesterday when we had the first call about how if someone who doesn't do these rituals and doesn't transcend that cycle, how if Nisium breaks that cauldron that represents that, they sort of return to and become the food for the Purusha or Thasar again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that pretty much sums up the Welsh part of the mythos. There's a lot then I can say about the Irish part if you guys have any time to talk more.
Yeah, I do. I forgot that we didn't get into the Irish.
There's some fascinating stuff in the Irish version. So let's just move into the Irish parallel. So basically what we've established is that there is this consistent, coherent mythos, and you can see very clearly that the Vedic Purusha is a being of fire, and I want to really emphasize that. And he is the generator of earth and sky, and then if we're correct in the Norse version, he's still a deity of fire. And then in the Welsh version, we see that just all these details have stayed consistent, and so we shouldn't expect necessarily some major changes. So if we want to find the Purusha in the Irish mythology, we most likely should try to look for a being of fire. And it's sort of convenient once you understand the genealogy of the gods a bit, you can start to hone in on who this might be, because if you look at Nate, for example, N-E-I-T, he is who I believe to be the Gaelic Vishnu. And as we discussed before, Vishnu is the prologue step of the Purusha formation, the sacred space underlying the Purusha, who blossoms into the Purusha with his energy, basically. And we also know that the Purusha creates earth and sky. And what we have in the Irish genealogy is Nate, who could be Vishnu. His son is called Delvaith, Delbaed, and Delvaith means fire form, or forming fire, like a creative forming fire. So we have this figure who is explicitly given a name meaning fire, and it's a fire form, or a forming, generating fire, and that's his name. And furthermore, we know, once we identify who earth, sky, and the sun gods are, we can see that the earth goddess is Eru, as we've discussed before, and the father of Eru is Delvaith. So earth is generated by this Delvaith. And then furthermore, the primordial sun god is Elaha. Elaha and Bres are two forms of the sun god, as I've discussed. But Elaha's father is Delvaith. And as we know from, for example, the Norse mythos, the sun and moon are emitted as sparks from out of Muspelheim. So this also aligns with the fires of Muspelheim create the sun. And that's what we have in the Irish genealogy, is Elaha is the son of this Delvaith, the fire form. And the Purusha is also said, it is also said that the breath that comes out of the Purusha is the wind. So the vital airs that go into him are like prana, or wind. But then again, once he sacrificed, the breath that comes out of him is the wind of the world that he's generating. So the wind god Vayu is the breath that he emits. If we look at the Irish wind god is the Dagda. The father of the Dagda is Delvaith. So once again, you don't have the Dagda you don't have the name the Dagda in the vital heirs position, but you have the Dagda himself as the son of Delvaith, just like the breath that the Purusha breathes out is the wind. And then it also says in that same passage that the sun emerges from the Purusha, and as I said, Elaha is the son of the Purusha. So you have, who are the father of earth, sun, and wind gods in the Irish version? It is Delvaith, the fire form, or the forming fire. And then interestingly, in that Irish genealogy, you have then the grandsons of the Dagda are the sky deities, the triple father sky, which is Macgrania, Mackecht, and Macquill. So that's a bit interesting, that instead of that sky being formed directly from Delvaith, it's his great grandson, but it's still coming directly from Delvaith via the Dagda, so via the wind. So it's sort of like a different way of thinking about how the sky is formed out of Delvaith. It's via the channel of the wind, and there's this continuity between the wind and then eventually the triple father sky. So it's pretty interesting. You still have a direct line, even in that case, to the Irish father sky from Delvaith. So once we have Delvaith, who is this forming fire, and he's son of Nate, and he's father of earth, sun, and wind, and great grandfather of sky, we have a good candidate for who the Purusha might be. And there is a euhemerized myth involving Delvaith that I think is a clue that leads into a larger mythos where we can start to piece together the Irish Purusha mythos. And this is in the Dinchenahas of Loch Lugborta. And what happens is Delvaith and his 5 sons go to the very center point of Ireland. So there is a point in Ishnach by Loch Lugborta that is considered the very center point of Ireland. I don't know if it's physically the exact center point, but it is traditionally considered the center point of Ireland. And from this location, Delvaith lights a magical fire, and the fire spreads to basically the 5 sections of Ireland, and each one of the streams of fire that go out from the center point are accompanied by one of the sons of Delvaith. So if you can look at this a little bit esoterically and understand that Delvaith himself actually is the fire, right? Because his name means he is the forming fire, and the Purusha is Agni, is the fire. His sons then, of course, are like emanations of his own fire, continuations of his fire. So his sons themselves are these streams of fire shooting out into the corners of Ireland. And if you have some experience reading myth, you can also understand that Ireland is this, it is the nation. It stands for the cosmos as a whole, in that sort of microcosm equals macrocosm sense. Then this is the very center point of the cosmos, like a pillar of fire that is spreading out into every corner of this Ireland cosmos. And so I think that must be one of the steps of the Purusha sacrifice. As we know, in the Rig Veda version of the Purusha sacrifice, the Purusha is divided, quote unquote. It is the totality, but somehow its portions split and become the parts of the cosmos. It is the totality of the created cosmos. And in this myth, we have this central fire that shoots out into 5 portions and fills the cosmos, becoming, taking domain of each of the corners of the cosmos, of Ireland. So I'll read the passage. It says, or else the lake was named after Luith Mac Tael, who was called Delvaith. For that territory was the place that Delvaith Mac Tael took possession of when he came northwards out of Munster with his 5 sons, after being warned by his own daughter to give up his land to her and her husband. Then Delvaith lit a magic fire, and 5 streams burst forth from it, and he set one of his sons to watch each of the streams. He himself stayed at that spot, and it may be from that lake, and it may be from him that the lake of the place had their name, Loch Lugborta. For till then his name was Luith, but thenceforth Delvaith, that is Dolv Aith, from the enchanted fire. So it's also connected to a lake there, which is interesting because Slasar emerges from a lake at the beginning of his myth. So it could be, connecting to the same center point lake idea. And we have Delvaith also explicitly called Luith, which is Lugaid here. And it's reiterated that his name was Lugaid and also Delvaith. So you have to remember going forward that Delvaith and Lugaid are 2 names of the same divine figure, and they can be used in the same mythos. They mean, they're different name epithets for the same deity.
Yeah, well, specifically this Lugaid Mac Con, because there are many Lugaids.
Yeah, and this is why there's so many Lugaids, is that this Purusha sacrifice, it's an idea that happens cyclically, and it happens in different at different points in different contexts sometimes. So there's different variations of it, and so you have these different Lugaids. And the other interesting thing about this in Shenahas passage is that in this same passage, the paragraph before, it says, this location of Loch Lugborta, it could be named after Lu, because this is where Lu is killed in the end. And so if we take this as both events being connected to this location, then we can also understand this continuity between Lugith and Lu, which can be quite confusing, because there's this distinction between Lugith and Lu usually, but at the same time there's an obvious continuity happening too. And the way to understand this, as I've mentioned before, is that Lugith is usually the name connected to Purusha, the Irish Purusha / Prajapati version, the Purusha / Prajapati being, and then Lu is like his remanifestation as the god Mitra, which is what we are also going to see in the Greek version, is that there's this primordial Zeus, and then his remanifestation as Zeus, the son of Cronus. Because obviously we have to make sense of why there's so many differences between Lugith and Lu. It's too sort of nonsensical to just say they are one and the same, but at the same time they are continuous, or they are remanifestations of one and the same. So understanding this distinction and sameness at the same time is interesting. And so when you understand that Lugith Delvaith is the Purusha, and then Lu, son of Ethliu, who gets born much later, is his remanifestation as the king of the manifest world, then you can understand why Delvaith has this event at Loch Lugborta, the center point of Ireland, and then at the conclusion of the cycle, basically, Lu, son of Ethliu himself, gets killed at the same point where it all started, and he is the remanifest form of Lugith Delvaith, remanifesting the totality as the king of the manifest world, which is what Lu, son of Ethliu, is. And so that kind of ties this together and makes sense of the distinction between Lugith and Lu, but also how they are continuous.
Yeah, well, I mean, you also have, like, which would be a perfect link to what you're saying, the parallel to Tyr in where Fenrir bites his hand. It is Lugith who goes to decapitate Cuchulainn and has his hand chopped off. His name is Lugith directly. Yeah. So that's a perfect link right there. That actually, exactly. I went on a sort of a rabbit hole in my head. I kind of wonder, we can talk about this another time, if Typhon is like a Greek Narasimha, I was thinking.
Yeah, as you can see with the Lugith who kills or who beheads Cuchulainn, you can see that sometimes, in some cases, Lugith is connected to a more what we would expect to be a Mitra mythos. So we would expect, if we compare it to Tyr, that mythos, as we've explained before, that when Cuchulainn binds himself to the standing stone, and then right at the moment that he's beheaded, he drops his sword and it cuts off the hand of Lugith. Once we know that Lu is Tyr, then that comparison makes sense, because you can see there's this overlap between the names Lugith and Lu, and that's because of the overlap between Purusha and the Mitra type, I believe. So
yeah, and this Delvaith Lugith, so we've just gone over how he is like a direct connections to him and Tassar and Ether and Purusha, and if there was any question about Surtr being the Purusha, this Lugith Mac Con in his conflict with Yogin is
I wanted to
just utter proof that, Surtr, because that sort of parallels Surtr and Freyr's conflict, as you were saying a couple days ago.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely want to touch on that. So maybe we should read through this Lugith Mac Con. So basically, once we know that the name Lugith is connected to Delvaith, it's interchangeable with Delvaith, and we know that this looks like the forming fire that splits apart and becomes the totality from the center point, and creates Earth itself, is the father of Earth, Wind, and Sun. Then we can look at the other Lugith myths, and see which ones, you know, can tell us more about the Irish Purusha mythos. And it turns out that there's some extremely exact matches and a lot of information that is preserved in the Irish tradition. So the most interesting one, I think, or that will be the most precise, is with this Lugath Mac Con. So for starters, you have the 5 Lugaths who, this is the step before. Lugath Mac Con is the son of the 7 Lugaths. That's important. So you have Lugath Mac Con. He is the son of the chief among 7 Lugaths, 7 brothers who are all named Lugaths. So we know that Lugath is a name for the Irish Purusha. And we have this myth with 7 Lugaths that then give rise to 1 Lugath. This is just an uncanny parallel to the 7 Purushas who then congeal into the 1 Purusha, who is the Purusha. So what happens is, first of all, Dara has 7 sons, and he names them all Lugath. Dara, D-A-I-R-E, is an epithet that the Dagda has. So once we know that the Dagda is the wind god, we can look at Dara, D-A-I-R-E, and guess that this might be some primordial form of the wind god, who is otherwise known as Dagda. But here he's called Dara in this euhemerized legendary version of things. And this is obviously happening at a very primordial moment, because it's regarding the Lugaths. These 7 Lugaths are the sons of Dara, who seems most likely to be the wind god. In the Vedic version, we have the 7 Purushas, who are the combined vital heirs, aka winds. So if this is accurate, then you have in the Irish version the wind giving rise to the 7 Purushas, aka Lugaths, and the chief among these Lugaths then fathers the 1 Lugath Mac Con, and if that sequence is correct, then it has preserved exactly the same genealogy from the vital heirs / wind to the 7 Purushas to the 1 Purusha. Let's see. Okay.
I wonder if the name Dara could be directly equivalent to prana in not as like
Yes.
the substance itself, but like the in like a mythological sense. So like the first vital airs, they're called the prana brita, meaning like the breath holders or the breath bearers, and that prana, as Collin sent something, is that Brahman that was created before all of this, the absolute, the inert reality that pre-exists everything, is identified directly with just the primordial prana, and that's probably what this Dara is.
Yeah, I think so. And there's even in the legends, there's like multiple Daras who are kind of confused, and they might be separate. And there's a whole there is a whole clan named after Dara, which it's like the Dareen or something. I can't pronounce it, but they're one of the source clans of all these euhemerized legendary deities that we see in the myths. You can kind of trace back to the clan of Dara, so that's interesting. So basically what happens is you have the 7 Lugaths, and then the sovereignty goddess approaches them, and I'll just read this quote. "I will tell thee, gentle youth, with me sleep the high kings. I, the tall, slender maiden, am the kingship of Alba and Erin. To thee have I revealed myself this night, yet nothing more shall come of our meeting. The son thou shalt have, he it is that I shall sleep with. Happier fate. I will tell thee thy son's name. Lucky his lot. Lugath shall his name be, and Mac Con thereto. Of him, therefore, I pronounce this thus much. He shall be seer and prophet and poet. Dara, uttered a prophecy to them concerning Mac Con, unreproached. Mac Con shall win the ringing hill of Brega with Erin and pleasant Alba. So basically what this shows is the story of Dara giving rise to 7 Lugyths, and then one of the Lugyths is approached by the sovereignty goddess, and he is told that his son will also be Lugyth, and that Lugyth will be basically the chosen one, the chosen king, who will become the high king of all Ireland. So anyways, if this parallel needs to be driven home anymore, not only do you have Dara, who is the air, the wind, giving rise to 7 Lugyths, which is the name for the Gaelic Purushas, you then have from out of these 7, you have the one Lugyth who becomes the chosen king. Furthermore, just to summarize what happens, ultimately, at the very end, at the conclusion of his story, after he becomes king, he has a downfall, basically, and he is killed with his back to a standing stone by a spear, which is it's an apparent sacrificial scene, because he puts his back to a standing stone and he has a spear thrown through him. So you have the complete narrative of a Purusha figure, because he is formed in this way, becomes the high king, and then is killed in a sacrificial posture. And the other important detail with this is that, if it was unclear that Surtr might be the Purusha, if there was question about that, once we've established all this background stuff about Lugyth, there is a myth of Lugyth, Mac Con, this same Mac Con Lugyth, who, in this myth, he fights a war specifically against the parallel of Freyr. So in a chapter of my book, I discuss how the name Owen, Eogan, Owen, is most likely a code name, a legendary epithet of Angus Og, who is the parallel of Freyr. So what happens is there's a dispute between Lugyth Mac Con and Owen, and this is over the ownership of either a magical yew tree or a musician in different versions. And the king Aliel, he awards the musician or the yew tree to Owen instead of Lugyth. This creates a bitter enmity between them, and after this point, Lugyth goes out of the country into exile. And he gathers his forces and returns and wages a specific battle against Owen and his forces. At the beginning of this battle, he specifically calls out Owen to engage with him in single combat. So it makes it very clear this is a fight between Lugyth and Owen, and their armies are there with them, but he wants to fight Owen, and Owen turns down the single combat fight because he had said some unjust things against Lugyth. So there's some sort of question of honor there, and he refuses to fight him in single combat. And ultimately, one of Lugyth's warriors kills Owen instead of Lugyth himself. That is the big difference. But Lugyth is there at the killing. In short, the army of Lugyth kills Owen, and then after this point, Lugyth himself is blamed for the death of Owen, and as a result of this, the downfall of Lugyth also occurs, because Aliel takes revenge on Lugyth for this battle and for the death of Owen, and Aliel bites the cheek of Lugyth, and he has a magical poisonous tooth, and this poisonous tooth causes decay in half of the face of Lugyth. So his face is beginning to decay. He's been poisoned, and around the same time, he pronounces a false judgment in sort of a case that's brought before him. He pronounces the wrong or a false judgment, and this is said to lead to his ultimate downfall. This combined with the poison.
So, what you were just saying about the Lugith Mac Con fighting against Owen, how one of the differences in this story versus the Freyr and Surtr, where Surtr directly kills Freyr, it's actually Lugith's army who kills Owen here. But Lugith's army, if this is like a Ragnarok battle, would be like the sons of Muspel, whom Surtr leads in that fight.
So, in short, not only does Lugith have this exact line of descent from Dara to the 7 Lugiths and then to him, and then he also has this mythos of him becoming worn down until he is then killed in a sacrificial way. But he also, his main opponent, at least one of his main opponents he has a rivalry with, is the parallel of Freyr. And as we know in the Ragnarok, one of the only specific battles of Surtr is against Freyr, and Surtr kills Freyr. And there is an interesting thing in his death where he doesn't have a weapon and all that. So Freyr is killed in an unjust way. And actually, the way that Owen is killed, Lugith actually gets mad at the way that Owen is killed because it is some sort of unjust, unseemly way that he is killed by one of his men in his army. But you have the same opposition between Lugith and Owen. And that directly is the cause for Lugith being killed himself in the end. And so it is a significant part of his mythos.
It was a minor thing. You mentioned the conflict between them began over the ownership of a bard. And I'm pretty sure Skirnir is a bard. And obviously the conflict between Freyr and Surtr is not revolving around the ownership over Skirnir, but he is involved in Freyr's death in the sense that he's the one that he gave his sword to. And also, Lugith Mac Con is called of the Red Sword. He's called in You of the Disputing Sons in the 24th verse, if anybody wants to look that up. He's called Mac Con of the Red Sword, specifically. And this red sword sounds eerily similar to Surtr's flaming sword, or Loganda Swerv, that is mentioned in Voluspa 52 and chapters 4 and 51 of Gylfaginning. The sword that he uses to destroy the entire, or all the worlds at the end of Ragnarok, which is when his battle with Freyr takes place. And both of them murder the Owen or Freyr in an unarmed state over a bard who would be Skirnir. And yeah, I thought that was another very damning piece of obscure detail, a damning piece of evidence to link the two even further in case anybody had any questions. And I know that there was something you wanted to mention about an attestation or documentation of worship of Surtr, who would be Purusha.
Right. Yeah. So building on this, you have Surtr with the same sort of battle against the Freyr parallel, and he even has the red sword, or Lugith has the red sword while Surtr has the flaming sword. But this can still be difficult, I think, for people to contextualize how Surtr could be the Purusha, who is such an important totality figure, and in the sources that come down to us, Surtr is depicted in a somewhat narrow way, or at least we only have this one part of his story that shows him as the destroyer and as a Jotun, a Jotnar figure. Something that gives us a lot more context and the ability to really see Surtr as this Purusha is the fact that we actually have evidence that Surtr was worshipped in the historical pagan era. So I'll just read this section of Wikipedia that describes a recorded case of a worship of Surtr. The 12th to 13th century Icelandic Book of Settlements describes the 150 kilometer journey of a chieftain's son, Thorvaldr Holbarki Tharson, through Iceland's interior to sing a poem of praise, a drapa, a ritual act to the giant that lived inside, quote, Helsins Surtr, unquote, that is, Surtr's cave, which is called Surtsheiler in modern Icelandic. Archaeological research inside the cave in 2001, 2012, and 2013 has shown what was once theorized to be evidence of outlaws' activity in the cave, bones of sheep and oxen, instead documents evidence of Viking Age ritual activities undertaken inside the cave for 65 to 100 years prior to Iceland's conversion to Christianity around 1000 AD. This suggests a possible cult to appease the fire giant. So basically, we actually have evidence that people were propitiating at least Surtr and doing rituals. We don't know exactly what the meaning and context of those rituals were, of course, but when you have all this other comparative context showing that Surtr is in this position of this Purusha figure, it makes perfect sense that he was that rituals were given to him, and it totally shatters this sort of narrow view of what Surtr was, how he was treated by actual heathens in the pre-Christian era. He was actually being propitiated and rituals done to him. So
yeah, that would be called
I think it's just extremely
in modern thing, and
it would be
not even realizing that Jotnar was actually worshipped. That's very interesting.
That actually people were worshiping him. So
I wonder if it was a prayer as like appeasement, very similar to prayers to Apollo or Rudra to not kill them or afflict them with diseases because of Surtr's destructive nature. But it doesn't really go into that.
Possible, but that's possible. But it doesn't. It's not really. It doesn't have to be that either. I mean, I think people might default to saying that could be that, but I just think the context shows that it could be much more. The context, there's an entire pilgrimage being done to this cave by the chieftain's son for 150 kilometers. So there's an importance to it, and there's a lot of evidence of it being repeatedly done. So maybe propitiation of his destructive wrath, but maybe it's connected to this whole Purusha concept, and maybe those two things are kind of both part of the worship that we're seeing in that evidence. What were we talking about? The from the south thing. Just like Surtr is mentioned as coming from the south in Ragnarok, Lugith Mactile, who aka Delveith, who we discussed in the Din Shenahas of Lachluk Borta, it is said that he comes from the south, from Munster, to the center point of Ireland where he lights his magical fire. So he comes out of the south. And it's hard to tell if that's at the beginning of the cycle or the end, or the point in the cycle that is both beginning and end. But in any case, that Lugith, he comes from the south. And then you have another instance of another Lugith who is from the south.
Yeah, so this second Lugith, who also comes from the south, is called Lugid Lovderg, or of the Red Hand. So similar red detail. He rules Ireland jointly with Conoing Bekeclach, and Lugid Lovderg rules the southern part, whereas Conoing rules the northern half. I think it is Finn McCool who even prophesies the strength of this youth, this Lugid Lovderg, from the south, because he killed the previous ruler of the south in order to become the ruler of the south. So, just as you mentioned earlier in the talk, that this name Lugith is directly tied to and related to the Purusha type in the Irish sources, you have a second Lugith who is specifically tied to the south and coming from the south, just as Surtr and his sons of Muspel do. I mean, I think that does enough to illustrate that Surtr is as well this Purusha.
Yeah, it's a little bit too much. It's a little too much lining up there, and it is not only do you have the position in the creation, but you also have this specific narrative myth of who he fights, and that lines up as well. So if you have any question about, sometimes it may seem that Surtr doesn't fit as well, because obviously we've only received a certain part of this mythos of Surtr, and he may seem like he only has this one role as destroyer, and he isn't represented as the totality, of course, but he is the embodiment of the primordial fire, and that is the key there. And he has this narrative myth, which then aligns with this Lugith, who is much more clearly the Purusha. And the one other, there are other Lugiths that you can look at that could be relevant as reiterations and variants on this Purusha narrative. And I think the most interesting one is probably Lugith Red Stripe. And whereas Lugith Mac Con, he is the son of one of 7 Lugiths, so it's 7 then 1. With Lugith Red Stripe, he is the son of a triple father. He has 3 fathers who sleep with the same woman, and he is born of that union. So he has 2 stripes across horizontally across his body, dividing him into 3 portions, and each one of those portions of his body is reflecting one of his 3 fathers. So he is the combination of 3 fathers. So that is, his body is again an image of a totality that's divided into parts. So again, you see this this theme of the Purusha that is divided, and its parts reflect portions of the totality of the cosmos, etc. But this is 3 instead of 7, so it could be a different iteration of the Purusha with a different esoteric meaning, but these still are part of the same mythos.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, in some cases, where the numerology is the same, and sometimes where it's different. Like throughout Norse mythology, 9 is very supreme in representation, and I'm coming to the realization that I think it's more of like a number of totality, in a sense, rather than various other ideas. Because then you even have, I'm not going to get into all that, but yeah, I there was something on the tip of my tongue, or like in just like the forefront of my mind, that I almost remembered it in regards to, there was something we talked about recently when I was sending those voice messages instead of texting later last week, where you said something about like a triple birth or being, and I asked if that was, Lugith's Red Stripe. I don't remember exactly what that was.
Well, what is interesting about Lugith Red Stripe is his 3 fathers they're called the 3 Finns. So the name Finn is appearing here, which is connected to Finn. It can also just mean white, of course. So it's hard to tell, but these 3 Finns, their individual names mean, or their individual names are Bress, Lothar, and I'm forgetting something like Nar, I believe, Nar. And anyways, these etymologies are very obscure in some cases, but Bress is the name of one of the sun gods, so he could be representing the sun. Lothar can sometimes be connected to, if it comes from a Scandinavian root, it can be a borrowing that means something else, but there's a possibility that it connects to a root relating to mud or muddiness. And then Nar has various possible meanings, including like shameful / noble, which is an interesting pairing there, but also it is connected to a poetic name for heaven, the heavens. So if you had muddy sun and heavens, you would have sort of a triple elemental sort of origin here, which could parallel something like the muddy region of
the chaos ether Erebus, the three
Niflheim,
right.
or something, and then you could have heavens could be like the ethers of Muspelheim, and then the central point is like the sun instead in that but it doesn't perfectly line up, obviously, with Ginunga Gap. But instead you have mud, heavens, and then sun as perhaps like a centering element. But anyways, was that related to what you were thinking about?
Yeah, I just looked up the message, and it was I was responding to when you mentioned the three airs in the Greek reckoning: chaos, ether, and Erebus.
So I think that leads in perfectly. If we could just jump to the Greek version. So basically, the Irish version tells us that indeed, like fire he is a fiery being still in the Delvite version. His name means fire. He also is related to a body that is divided into either seven, or the central flame of Delvite that gets divided into 5 portions that are the totality, or the body of Lucath Red Stripe is divided into 3 portions that are the totality. All these different images of the totality divided, and that's what Lucath is. And then, if you look at the Greek version, you have to kind of look at the cosmic egg and what comes before that, right? So what gives rise to the cosmic egg, or what gives rise to earth and sky. So the very beginning points of the creation. And what I noticed was that you have chaos, famously, of course, right? And chaos is often described as a chasm. Chasm is also used with chaos in different contexts. And I've heard mentioned multiple times by different people that chaos seems relatable to something like Ginunga Gap, as this primordium that is in a flux, a void type of space. But along with chaos, and the genealogies in the variant traditions of Greek mythology are very confusing, because they're all different. There's different orders of events of which gods are born first. But along with chaos is one of 3 deities that are called the 3 heirs, that are born about the same time, or one after another. And so the 3 heirs are chaos, Erebus, and ether. So the way these are sort of spatially laid out is that Erebus is the dark depths, right? So it would be the below space, the dark. It's also misty in some tellings. And then chaos is this, is in the middle as this chasm. And then you have up in the heights, you have the ether, which is described as light and rarefied light and air. And within the etymology of ether, however, is the fact that ether is also connected to fire. And this is sometimes mentioned in the mythology, that this ether, even though it's most often connected to light, it is also connected to fire. So this is just a case of like what was emphasized the most in the Greek tradition is the light aspect of the ether, but it was also connected to fire, to a fiery substance. And the etymology of ether, it is connected to the same root word as Delvite, and the same root word as Aeth in general. Aeth meaning fire in Gaelic. Aeth, ether. Ether is Aeth. Delvite is Aed or Aeth. So you can see it's the same root word going back. And what is interesting about this also is, as you mentioned before, I'm just bringing this back, but the ether, this root word for ether, meaning it just means fire. It is also commonly connected to words meaning black, like blackened by fire, including the word like Ethiopia. This comes from the color black, directly formed from this root word meaning fire or burnt. And so this is how you can conceptualize the connection between the bright light of the ether in the Greek version, and then the being of fire, whose name means black or dark, in the fire giant Surtr, right? So it's hard conceptually, I think, for people to see that Surtr, meaning black, could connect to this bright ether. and that the fires of Muspelheim could connect to the light of the ether. But these are the same. What I'm putting forward, at least, is that these may be the same original concepts from the same root, but sort of given slightly different emphasis in these two branches, so that the blackened burnt quality comes out more in Surtr, and he is more associated with the fires. But then the light of the fires is emphasized more in the case of ether, but it's still retained in the descriptions of the ether and in the etymology of the ether that this is AETH, and this is fiery, and this is connected to the root of blackening, even though, so it is this same duality of life and death is the light that also blackens by its fire that burns. I think so. Is that touching on what you were trying to say?
Yeah, that sounds good. That would be like the difference between two different cultures poetically referring to the sun as either that which shines brightly or that which casts shadows. I mean, it would be the same thing, because you can't have light without the darkness. But going back to the three airs with Erebus and the three fins, Erebus is directly cognate with Rajas in the Nasadiya Sukta, which is in the exact same position directly before the sky and heavens beyond, and as far as mention, as Yor, the earth, in Voluspa stanza 3. It's almost verbatim, in just simply a different language, the exact same sequence of events, and Rajas is described as darkness, but also can mean like dirt. And if it's in the same place in the creation account as the earth, which is dirt and soil and dust, that could have to do with that. I don't remember which name it was of the three fins that meant mud.
True. Lothar.
All right, yeah. So, and then I remember the meaning of Bress and why it's applied to the younger sun god. It has the same meaning that Uller does, or a similar at least, with referring to the beautiful appearance, because Uller means simply a good appearance. And
Absolutely,
I believe Bress means the same thing. So it doesn't maybe necessarily need to mean the sun directly. Could. And I wonder if that applies to the name Finn, because it can mean seer, not just like white or anything, which could be the Rishis, because the vital airs are called the Rishis in the Shatapada Brahmana.
That's true. Well, that is possible. That's very interesting. And yeah, like you said, Bress doesn't have to mean the sun. It's the name of the sun god, but it means something like, or it's taken as a poetic term for beauty. So that could be, and also as we know, Finn or AKA Rudra is an esoterically connected to the sun, and other gods are esoterically connected to the sun as well. So it's hard to precisely know what this Bress is referring to. But I do think it's worthwhile to try to line these up, because we're looking for what are the vital heirs of the Greek tradition, and here we have these three groupings called the heirs, the three heirs, and the three heirs are Erebus, Chaos, and this ether. And once you understand the properties of ether and Erebus and Chaos, they align quite decently with Niflheim, the place of the cold waters and mists, and then Ginnunga Gap, the gap in the center, and then Niflheim in the south. The only issue is they're sort of transposed in space a little bit differently, because the Norse case relates them to the cardinal directions in the world, and so south is hot, south is Muspelheim, and north is cold. But in Greek, it's not. It's more sort of, I think, abstracted into up is more rarefied ether.
Yes,
at least
that
as
has
far
to
as
do
I
with
understand.
geography.
I don't even know if it's geography.
Because the name sun from Suna literally means from the south. Because according to them, geographically, like their long winters and everything, the sun would seem to appear from the south. So that's a geographical difference there.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with the parallel at all. I think it's just culturally, the core, the key here is to understand that the fire is connected to the ether, so that's the fiery place, and then the dark Erebus would be the parallel of Niflheim, and Ginunga Gap and chaos have this similar chasm imagery connected to them. So once you understand this parallel of Erebus, chaos, aether is the same as Niflheim, Ginunga Gap, Muspelheim. Well, Surtr is the embodied fires of Muspelheim in congealed into the form of a being. In Greek tradition, in some texts, we have ether itself is its own deity, but sometimes ether is, sometimes there is a Zeus who is described as the embodiment of the ether, up in this sort of primordial, very high level of the generation in the creation. Zeus is esoterically the embodied ether.
Oh, that is pretty uncanny, given everything we just got to talking about. Wonder if there's any sort of connection we haven't found. I mean, obviously, so in the Orphic theogony or cosmogony, I don't remember which one, Zeus swallows Phanes or the whole universe.
Oh, yeah.
He's sort of takes on the power or kingship originally from Phanes, but then is also at the same time. I mean, they don't contradict each other, obviously, because Phanes would be more Savitar Prajapati.
Yes, exactly.
Who comes from Purusha, obviously. So that's
wow, that's sort of these three steps that our chart is kind of going to show, that there's these three steps of remanifesting this Prajapati deity, which is the Purusha is the highest. Then the next manifestation is the Prajapati Brahma of the world, as the totality of the world, and then the next final step is the Mitra Varuna, aka Zeus. So Zeus, as most people think of him, is Zeus, son of Cronus in the myths. That is the late born manifestation. So the third and final manifestation of this sort of all god. And yeah, so the key thing here is that just like in the Irish version, you have the names Lugith and Lu. Lugith is the name of the higher form of the Purusha, and then Lu is the name of the sovereign of the world who's born much, much later. He's the late coming god. So he has this distinction in when he's born, but he is a remanifestation of Lugith. And you have in the Greek tradition, Zeus of the ether, who is the embodied ether. And then you have Zeus, son of Cronus, who's born much, much later. But there is this continuity, obviously, because they're both Zeus. They're both called Zeus. In the Irish version, they are Lugith and Lu. In the Greek version, they are just Zeus of the ether and Zeus, son of Cronus. And I'm just going to read this couple of quotes, because the other interesting thing is that ether itself is often the progenitor of earth and sky, just as the Purusha or Muspelheim, / Surtr is the progenitor of the not only the sun but also Ymir, who is earth and sky. So according to Hyginus's possibly confused genealogy, night, day, Erebus, and ether were the offspring of chaos, and Caligo, who is mist, and ether and Deus were the parents of earth, Terra, and sky, Caelus, and Mar, sea. And then the Homeric parsings from Methodius reports that Uranos, the sky, was ether's son, while Philodemus says that everything came from ether. And then possibly from the Derveni Theogony is the idea from a fragment of Chrysippus that, quote, everywhere is ether, which itself is both father and son. So it's everywhere is ether. It is this totality, pervading totality from which everything came. And then the early 6th century Neoplatonist Damascius comments on an Orphic text that serpent time was the father of 3 offspring: moist ether, limitless chaos, and misty Erebus. And so they are the 3 sons of time in that version, which is interesting. Going through these as fast as I can here.
Those little things about ether being everything and everywhere, that is directly applicable or comparable to the Purusha Sukta, which says Purusha is everything that was and yet will be, or I don't know if I'm
Yes,
paraphrasing that, but there's that
yeah,
specific
absolutely.
detail about him which applies to ether and no one else. Um, yeah, I'm sure something like that is missing from like Surtr or Delphi
Yeah,
Lugath or Thasar. Um,
yes. Yeah, those
but
specific lines aren't there, but the fact that it's preserved across from Greek to Vedic is very telling of how we should envision these figures in general. And then in the Neoplatonist Proclus, in his commentary on Plato's Republic, he says that from unaging time came ether and a great chasm, vast this way and that. And here, chasm is another name for chaos. So chaos and chasm are used interchangeably. And then from another quote from Damascus, he says that time fashioned from divine ether a bright white egg. So so time is acting sort of through ether and fashioning from it a bright white egg. And in the case of Ymir, the fires of Muspelheim, emanate and form Ymir, who is the egg. So some of these things can align decently.
absolutely, yeah, that adds up very well.
This is a passage describing Zeus's body as parts of the cosmos. So ether, the material element, is also mentioned twice in a 32-line hymn-like passage to Zeus, which was apparently part of the Orphic Rhapsodies, in which various parts of the physical cosmos are associated with parts of Zeus's body. Line 8 lists things contained in Zeus's body. Quote, fire and water and earth and air, ether, night and day, unquote. While line 17 says, quote, his, Zeus's, truthful royal mind is imperishable ether. In the Orphic hymn to ether, it says, yours are Zeus's lofty dwelling, endless power too, of the stars, of the sun, and of the moon you claim a share. O tamer of all, O fire breather, O life's spark for every creature, sublime ether, best cosmic element, radiant, luminous, starlit offspring, I call upon you and I beseech you to be temperate and clear. And so, in any case, in various esoteric fragments, Zeus is the embodied ether, just as Surtr is the embodied Muspelheim, and they are, as it says here, ether, the fire breather. And a few more citations supporting the ideas that sky is the son of ether, as sky is also created by Purusha Vishvakarman, and also that Zeus is the embodiment of this ether in the Greek sources. The 3rd century BC Greek poet Callimachus in fragment 498 says, quote, Uranos, that is sky, is called revolving Achmonides, son of Achmon, aka ether, son of ether, unquote. The Dictionary of Greek and Roman Biography and Mythology says, quote, in the Orphic hymns, ether appears as the soul of the world. And this concept of soul of the world is also how the Purusha is treated in Vedic tradition. So in the Orphic hymns, ether appears as the soul of the world, from which all life emanates, an idea which was also adopted by some of the early philosophers of Greece. In later times, ether was regarded as the wide space of heaven, the residence of the gods, and Zeus as the lord of the ether, or ether itself personified. And the citations for this personification of ether are Cicero's On the Nature of the Gods 2.36.40, Lucretius verse 499, Virgil's Aeneid 12.140, and Virgil's Georgics 2.325. And then Pseudo-Aristotle calls Zeus by the name Aetherios, meaning of ether. Euripides writes, quote, I swear by holy ether, home of Zeus. And Aeschylus says, quote, Zeus is the ether, Zeus the earth, and Zeus the sky, Zeus, the whole world and aught there is above it, unquote. So Aeschylus himself, the 5th century BC Greek tragic poet, calls Zeus both the ether but also the totality. And then Aristophanes in Thesmophriazusae 273 says, quote, I swear it by ether, the dwelling place of the king of the gods, Zeus, unquote. So we can see that throughout the Greek tradition, Zeus is identified with ether and as dwelling in ether and composed of ether and all of these things, and that Uranos, or sky, is part of him but also his son, like an emanation of him, just as the Purusha, part of his body is the sky, which he then creates as a separate entity in the sky-earth unity that is the egg that he creates. So this egg is an emanation of him that was part of his essence, but then created as a separate egg that is sky and earth, and he then is reborn from within it.
Yeah, I'm reminded of an Orphic variant to Zeus, where Zeus normally swallows everything in order to establish his sovereignty over everything. There's another variant where he goes to Nyx and asks her how to establish or assert his sovereignty over the whole universe. And she gives him a cord made of ether, and he wraps everything in existence with it. And everything is bound with this ethereal cord. And that's another variant, sort of explaining, first of all, binding being the whole sort of divine function of the Mitra type. It's even in the etymology of both Lu and Mitra. And that version doesn't exactly relate the different parts to his body or have the sort of swallowing thing, but it's, like I said, another variant that directly ties Zeus remanifesting the ether and everything under his own domain.
That is, yeah, that's interesting. It's definitely, you can start to see this through line as you tie everything together, and hopefully it answers some questions about how and why these things can actually parallel each other, and how this Purusha mythos was coherent and relatively consistent, and was the core of the esoteric meaning behind sacrifices.
Absolutely, I think that's a wonderful stopping point. And
all right, well, thanks for spending some time here getting through this important topic and
no problem
discussing
at all.
with me.
Yeah,
that was a lot of fun.